It was a somber and decidedly on script President Trump speaking at Normandy this morning.
To all of our friends and partners, our cherished alliance was forged in the heat of battle, tested in the trials of war, and proven in the blessings of peace. Our bond is unbreakable. From across the earth, Americans are drawn to this place as though it were a part of our very soul. We come not only because of what they did here, we come because of who they were.
The president praising our allies and how they banded together to defeat the Nazis. There was no mention today of America first or nationalism. Today simply wasn't the time nor the place for that, but those are two of the central tenets of this president's worldview and how America fits into it. Joining me now to discuss that and more, editor-at-large at The Hill, Steve Clemons. Steve, we heard President Trump today talking about the allies in the Second World War working together on D-Day. I mean, D-Day itself, the war, even Reconstruction, were all about allies working together. Today, the president who spoke is an America First supporter who criticizes our allies and NATO itself. I'm curious your thoughts at seeing that sort of juxtaposition.
Well, you've struck right at the heart of the challenge today in that D-Day was a dark time for the world, a dark time for our allies, and we went to war for our allies, and we had their back, and we took back territory from the Germans in that time. And you have to ask yourself today, could that ever happen again? Would we pull for each other in each other's dark days? After 9/11, our NATO allies came to our defense and fought with us in Afghanistan, and so that happened. But the America First policies that Donald Trump has pushed forward have created a lot of doubt among our allies in our commitment to them, and there's a distancing going on. And so while this is a wonderful and poignant moment 70 years ago to sort of look at what we did on D-Day, the foil of it is today that probably wouldn't be possible today, and that's a very sad thing.
I couldn't help but note as well that the most divisive president in recent memory is the one who's standing there talking about unity and alliances, but then also his whole approach to foreign relations has been, or seemed to be, what's in it for us? And I found myself wondering, well, I mean, you could argue there really wasn't anything directly for us at D-Day or even in the Second World War, just the greater good. And it makes you wonder if he would have even given the order to go ahead with D-Day if it had been him instead of Roosevelt in the Oval Office.
Well, I think the greater good used to be something that we saw as our values, making the world safe for our values meant also making the world safe for us. And the line between our national interests and global security was not a big one, and we were and we have been the world's guarantor of security and liberty and openness for a long time. And I think the kind of pugnacious nationalism that Donald Trump has brought into force is being mimicked in many places around the world. He's not necessarily the original inventor of this, but he's certainly somebody who has mastered it in a way that we haven't seen for generations. So it's a rise of a kind of dark nationalism, a pugnacious nationalism that is disdainful of international deals, that's disdainful of international institutions and alliances and treaties. And in that world, you're just going to have a much harder time pulling allies together to solve global problems. And I have to tell you, it's very hard to look at the United States today in any serious issue that doesn't have a fundamental international dimension to it, where we have to work with others to solve those challenges. And we're going to be less able to do that in the future.
And then when it comes to the Marshall Plan, the rebuilding of Europe after the end of the Second World War, we spent an enormous amount of money without ever expecting anything in return. There was no hard, cold cash in return, but we really did get quite a bit out of it, at least stability in Europe for the better part of 75 years.
Well, we got friendships, we got trust, we got big projects that we did together. You know who's doing the Marshall Plan today is China. The Belt and Road Initiative is like a Marshall Plan, and it's building up infrastructure way outside its borders and territory. It's creating huge infrastructure investments in other countries, and China looks like the benevolent player here, giving all this capacity to other countries in its region. But it does have a self-interest in doing so. It wants commerce, it wants these trading networks, and it wants a significant portion of the earth to rotate around its interests and needs and presence. And that's what we did with the Marshall Plan. There was a big selflessness that was part of it, but there was also a self-interested dimension to it. We've just, I think, forgotten how to do that sort of thing. And when you look back, as we do today, on D-Day and what unfolded, the institutions we built, bringing other countries back to life after that devastating war, we can be very proud of that. But we have to ask ourselves, could the United States and would the United States do that again? And I think you'd be very hard-pressed to say that we would. I don't think we would today.
You make some great points and raise some great questions as well. A couple of ironies that caught my attention as we were watching the remembrance today, that 75 years after defeating the Nazis, we're seeing a rise in anti-Semitism and right-wing nationalism in Europe. This after defeating an anti-Semitic enemy that was national, a nationalist party themselves. That irony I'm sure wasn't lost on you either.
No. I mean, it's horrible. I've been over in Hungary and I've seen the anti-George Soros, anti-Semitic posters all over this country, and it's like it is a bizarre. It's whiffs of fumes of the 1930s that have come back, but it's not just about the Jewish community. It's about the other. It's about Syrian refugees. It's about people who are being displaced and moved through no fault of their own, who are under siege and being terrorized wherever they are. And what Donald Trump is perfecting is the art of rejection, the art of building walls. Globalization used to be a kind of higher and higher trust exercise where you would move people and ideas and institutions across borders more frictionlessly. We now have connectedness in the world, but we have fear and walls and rejection of those people who are in times of need. And I think what's particularly poignant is almost every American I know come from people who came from tough circumstances elsewhere, and we are now turning our back on that legacy and rejecting people who are having tough times.
The other irony from today and from this week is the role of Germany, who was obviously our enemy on D-Day and in the Second World War. Now they are, not only was Angela Merkel present at all of the ceremonies, Germany's arguably the democratic leader of Europe.
Well, I would also put France up there with Germany, but certainly Germany's been the powerhouse. She has been a defender of doing what was right in these tough times. There's always the saying, I used to take a political science 1 course, that you never really knew the values of a nation unless you saw it under stress. And there's just no doubt that Angela Merkel during these stressful times has stood by Germany as a sponge for immigrants, for refugees, for people who have come in and are having tough times. And she remembers the Cold War. She remembers the Soviet era and the divisions across Europe. And she doesn't want to have that be the legacy that follows after her tenure as Chancellor of Germany. But she gave a very powerful speech, a commencement speech at Harvard the other day, in which she says she feels and sees dark forces gathering in the future. So you're right, Germany is a huge player. It is ironic. It's a success story after World War II that promulgated so much hate and division and death. And then Germany became a superstar nation doing the right things. But it's in danger again. And the solvency of the alliance and relationship between Germany and the United States today is not great. It's not a strong bond, not as nearly as strong as it should.
Finally, President Trump has been lucky, you could argue we've all been lucky, that he's been a peacetime president. But as we look back on the 75th anniversary of one of the most important battles in our nation's history, is this a time to, I guess, look and imagine what might change if he wasn't a peacetime president? What would a Trump at war look like and sound like?
We really don't know. It's such a fascinating question to think about because Donald Trump likes to portray a muscularity and a pugnaciousness in how he positions American interests, that he would go all the way, do everything, but he's prone to recklessness. We've seen him go to the brink with the North Koreans and then become buddy-buddy with Kim Jong-un. And so he's got an unpredictability about him that is very hard to gauge. What I can say is that if we were to somehow trip into war or choose a war, what we do know about how Donald Trump governs is a way where he does not necessarily trust his advisors, listen to his advisors. His advisors are not always on the same page. He's not a deep student, boring into the details of plans and scenarios that have been provided for him. He's an impulsive decision maker. And so when you add all that up, the dangers of miscalculation, of misassessment, of escalation over things that shouldn't have escalated, that is the real danger we're in today, I think, with the Trump presidency, which, as you've indicated, really has not been fully tested like it may be in a coming year or two.
Some food for thought on a day fully appropriate for that purpose. Editor-at-large at The Hill, Steve Clemons. Steve, thanks for a few minutes. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
As our coverage of the 75th anniversary of D-Day continues, up next, a presidential historian is here. He looks at the lasting legacy of D-Day, including that of some of the legendary figures involved. Men like FDR and General Dwight D. Eisenhower, just to name a couple.